Last time, I made you a promise. I told you the story of Julius Caesar up until his death. But somewhere in the middle, I stopped and said, I'm going to skip a load of stories leading to the formation of the Triumvirate. That it'll be for another video. Well, this is that video. Because before Caesar crossed the Rubicon, before he conquered Gaul, before he was dictator for life, he pulled off something even more impressive. He took the two most powerful men in Rome and quietly talked them into handing him the keys to the entire republic. No army, no coup, just a handshake, a wedding, and the most outrageous backroom deal in history. This is the story of the First Triumvirate. But to understand the deal, you have to understand how Caesar even got into the room. And that story doesn't start with politics. It starts with war. Remember, I told you Caesar had to run to the countryside to escape dictator Sulla. But the moment Sulla loosened his grip, Caesar didn't go home and lie low. He went east, and he joined the army. And in 81 BC, at the siege of a city called Mytilene, he did the thing that put his name on the map. During the storming of the walls, Caesar watched a fellow Roman soldier go down. And instead of doing the sensible thing, which would be to not run into a collapsing battle, Caesar charged in and dragged the man out alive. For that, they gave him the civic crown, a little wreath of oak leaves. Sounds like a participation trophy, I know, but in Rome it was the second highest military honor a man could earn, and it came with one ridiculous perk. Whenever the man wearing it walked into a room, everyone had to stand and applaud, senators included. So picture it. Caesar is barely in his 20s, and he has already engineered a situation where grown senators are legally required to give him a standing ovation just for showing up. The boy who grew up believing he was divine now had the paperwork to back it up. And the reputation only got stranger from there. Around this same time, Caesar was sent on a diplomatic errand to the court of King Nicomedes of Bithynia to go and fetch a fleet of ships. He went, he got the ships, but he stayed at that court for so long that rumors started, saying Caesar and the king had become a lot more than friends. Caesar denied it for the rest of his life, and it never stuck to him in the way you'd think. Decades later, his own soldiers would march through Rome chanting songs about him being the Queen of Bithynia. The most feared man in the world, roasted by his own troops in a song. Bet you've seen that one before. Some things never change. Over the past few years, people learned a lot about Caesar, specifically that he does not wait for permission. When the Eastern king Mithridates attacked Roman territory, Caesar, having no rank or orders, raised a band of local fighters himself, drove the enemy back, and held the region on his own initiative. Think about what that is. A private citizen, with no authority whatsoever, raised an army that nobody approved of and used it to fight off a foreign king. In most countries today, that's a felony. In Rome, it got you noticed. And being noticed was the entire game Caesar was playing. Because while Caesar was building that name for himself out east, back home in Italy, the whole place was coming apart. A gladiator named Spartacus had broken out of his training school. What started as about 70 men with kitchen knives swelled into an army of tens of thousands, and for 2 years they ran circles around Rome, beating one consul after another. I'll skip the Spartacus story. That man deserves his own video, and he's getting one. The man was too phenomenal to be ignored. But what matters in our story right now is who stopped him, because that's where our deal really begins. The Senate, completely out of options, could no longer afford the war against Spartacus, so they turned to the richest man in Rome, a property tycoon named Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus took command, drilled the army back into shape, hunted Spartacus down, and crushed the revolt. Then, to make a point, he crucified 6,000 captured rebels along the road from Capua to Rome. One cross every 40 meters for over 100 miles. Brutal, effective, and as far as Crassus was concerned, it's his victory and his alone.
And it should have been, except for one man, Pompey. Pompey the Great,
Rome's golden boy, the dashing general the army worshipped, happened to be marching home from a war in Spain right as the last of Spartacus's men were fleeing north. His troops ran into about 5,000 stragglers and wiped them out. A mopping up job, nothing more. But then Pompey did something so shameless it is almost impressive. He sat down and wrote a letter to the Senate, and in it he said, more or less, that yes, Crassus had beaten the slaves in open battle, but it was he, Pompey, who had pulled the war up by its roots. So Crassus does 2 years of brutal, thankless work. Pompey turns up at the very end, catches a few runaways, and writes home to claim he finished the whole thing. Probably the origin of the coworker who does nothing on the group project but then presents it to the boss. And it worked. Pompey was handed a full triumph, the grandest parade Rome could throw. Crassus got an ovation, which was the budget version. Crassus never forgot it. From that day on, the 2 richest, most powerful men in Rome could not stand the sight of each other. So, where was Caesar while all of this was happening? Not on the battlefield with Spartacus. That was never his fight. Caesar was back in Rome, doing the things Caesar did best, spending money he absolutely did not have. You remember the games from last time? The 320 pairs of gladiators and the wild animal free shows I told you he paid for with borrowed money from Crassus? Yeah, Caesar was quietly making himself indispensable to the richest man, while charming nearly everyone else in the city. And the borrowing paid off. Caesar climbed the ladder. He became Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest in 63 BC, then praetor. Then he was sent off to govern in Spain, and there he finally became a real general. He marched on the local tribes who had never fully bent the knee to Rome, won battle after battle, and looted enough gold to bury that mountain of debt. His soldiers were so impressed they hailed him Imperator, victorious commander, right there on the field. So he sailed home in 60 BC wanting 2 things very badly. He wanted a triumph, his own parade for those wins in Spain, and he wanted to run for consul, the highest office in Rome. The trouble was that he could not have both. Here is the catch that nearly ended him. To celebrate a triumph, a general had to stay outside the city walls until the parade, but to run for consul, he had to register in person within the city. The calendar made it impossible to do both in time, so Caesar had to choose between the parade and the seat of the consul. And the Senate smelled blood. They were led by a stubborn, principled man named Cato, who loathed everything Caesar stood for, and they flat refused to bend the rules for him. They thought they finally had him cornered. Make him pick, and either way, he loses something. Caesar gave up the parade without blinking. Power over party every time. But losing the parade didn't solve his real problem, which was that the Senate was going to fight his consulship at every turn. So Caesar looked at the men standing in his way, and he had the idea that would change the world. 2 giants were blocking his path, Crassus and Pompey. Both of them were stuck behind that same stubborn Senate, both of them furious for their own reasons. Pompey had just come home from conquering the entire East, and the Senate was refusing to make any of it official, refusing to give his loyal veterans the land he had promised them. He's the greatest general in Rome, and a committee of old men were treating his life's work like an expired coupon. Crassus, for his part, was fighting for his business partners. The tax collectors of Rome, the Publicani, had bid far too much for the right to collect taxes in the province of Asia, and now they were drowning. They wanted a refund, a discount on what they owed the treasury, and Cato was blocking that too. Caesar saw 2 men in desperate need of something they could not buy. Pompey had the soldiers and love from the public, Crassus had the money, and Caesar had a shot at the one thing neither of them could buy, which was the laws. Most people in his shoes would have picked a side, befriend one giant, fight the other. Caesar did the thing nobody expected. He went to both of them, privately, and made each the same offer. He told Pompey he could get his veterans their land, and his conquests made official. He told Crassus he could get his taxmen their discount, and then he told them both the price. To stop fighting themselves and back his campaign. Honestly, getting Pompey and Crassus into the same room without a brawl was the greatest victory Caesar ever won. These men had spent a decade hating each other over who really beat Spartacus. Caesar talked them down and shook both their hands. Historians call it the first triumvirate, the rule of three men. But there was nothing official about it. No title, no signature, no announcement. It was a private pact between three citizens to quietly run a republic of millions from behind the curtain. Pompey brought the glory, Crassus brought the gold, and Caesar brought the plan. To reassure Pompey that he won't betray him for Crassus's money, Caesar handed his only daughter, Julia, to Pompey in marriage. And in 59 BC, with Pompey's soldiers and Crassus's money behind him, Caesar was elected consul. Caesar had a co-consul, a man named Bibulus, the Senate's pick, put there to keep him in check. Caesar steamrolled him so completely that Bibulus eventually gave up, locked himself in his house, and spent the rest of the year watching the skies for omens, which was his way of insisting that everything Caesar passed was technically invalid. Caesar ignored him entirely. The Romans noticed too. People stopped calling it the year of Caesar and Bibulus and started joking that it was the year of Julius and Caesar, like poor Bibulus didn't even exist. And then, one law at a time, Caesar honored the deal. For Pompey, a land law that settled his veterans on good farmland, and a vote that finally made all his eastern conquests official. Done. For Crassus, the bill his taxmen had been begging for. Caesar passed a law canceling a full third of what the publicani owed the treasury, a one-third tax cut for the richest investors in Rome. Sit with that one for a second. The single richest man in Rome bankrolls a politician, and the very first thing that politician does in office is hand that man's business partners an enormous tax break. Bet you've seen that one before. Well, the Romans invented a lot of things, and that was one of them. And Caesar did not forget himself in all this. He used his own laws to hand himself command of the armies of Gaul for 5 straight years, the job that would turn him into a legend, and the army that would one day march on Rome. Everybody got paid. The Republic got hijacked. And almost nobody noticed it was happening. For a few years, the three-man machine ran everything. When the cracks started to show, they even held a secret summit in the town of Lucca in 56 BC to patch things up and carve the spoils again. Caesar keeps Gaul. Pompey and Crassus get another turn as consuls. But a deal held together by ambition and a marriage has only 2 weak points, and within 2 years, both of them broke. The marriage went first. In 54 BC, Julia, Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife, died in childbirth. And this wasn't only politics. By every account, Pompey genuinely loved her, and Caesar adored her, and she had been the human bond holding 2 rivals together. With her gone, the only thing connecting Caesar and Pompey was the deal itself, and deals get cold. Then the ambition broke too. Crassus, the money man, the one who had spent his whole life overshadowed by Pompey's parades and Caesar's victories, decided he wanted military glory of his own. So at around 60 years old, he marched east to invade the Parthian Empire. It went about as badly as a war can go. At Carrhae in 53 BC, the Parthians destroyed his army and killed Crassus himself. There's a legend about how he died, and I'll be upfront that it may not be true, but it is too perfect to leave out. The story goes that the Parthians, mocking his endless greed, poured molten gold down his throat. Live by gold, die by gold? Is that how the saying goes? And just like that, the 3-legged stool lost 2 legs. Julia, the bond, was gone. Crassus, the buffer between the 2 giants, was gone. Which left exactly 2 men, Caesar and Pompey, each one commanding a loyal army, each one certain he was greater than the other, and nothing at all left standing between them. You already know where that road ends. A river called the Rubicon. 4 words, the die is cast. And a civil war that buried the Republic for good. But this is the part people miss about Julius Caesar. The Rubicon was not the real gamble. This triumvirate was. The masterstroke was never crossing a river with an army. It was that quiet afternoon, years before, when one broke politician sat 2 enemies down, shook both their hands, and walked out owning Rome. He didn't conquer the Republic. He bought it, on credit. and then spent the rest of his life paying it back in blood. The first triumvirate was 3 men who agreed to share the world. History has a rule about that. The world doesn't share. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button to get the next video. Next up is the story of Spartacus, the gladiator who terrified Rome and accidentally lit the fuse on this whole deal. And if you want to know how Pompey and Caesar died, that story is already waiting for you. The die was cast a long time before the Rubicon, and it is still rolling.